What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's Lumix Live. We are basically continuing the kind of thread that we've been doing through most of this month, which is, kind of taking a look at each of the different categories of cameras that we have, going over, some of the specs, the features, things like that, and really just answering whatever kind of questions y'all have while we kind of show off some cool stuff about the cameras. This one in particular for today, as the title shows, is really going to primarily focus on the video tools that are built into the camera. And mainly this is because most of the conversations that we've had over the last 3 weeks, there's been a lot of questions about, how do you use this? I want to try to be able to figure out this feature. So I wanted to put a stream dedicated to talking about, what these different features are, how you access them, what the differences are, and also try to show, I guess, kind of what some of them mean. For those of you that have either never used them in the camera or really have never heard of some of these. So I dropped the poll at the beginning of this stream to kind of get an idea and see, what everyone's kind of focus is in this kind of category. And what's really cool to see is just kind of the big split here between a few folks that are still, kind of figuring out what your kind of primary use of a Lumix camera is, if you're photo or video, or you're still not 100% sure. And then all the way up into what I'm not that surprised about is that video is definitely leading the pack. So it's kind of a usual surprise, although now hybrid is now leading the pack. So we're going to leave that poll running for the duration of the stream here. So as you come in, as you join, feel free to drop your answer in there. When you're rewatching this stream later, the poll won't be there, but you can always leave comments in the actual comment section so we can take a look at it. The important things about today's stream, it's incredibly interactive, so I'm here to answer any questions that you have within reason of what I can answer throughout the stream. So make sure you tag at Lumix Cameras before your question, as Thor has done in the chat. This way I can at least see it. It pops up. I know that you're asking me a direct question about something or a feature, and I'll do my best to address it as best I can. If I can't actually fully address the question, or I don't know everything, so some things may be over my head, it's always possible that someone in the chat may be able to get you an answer, or you can always follow up later on after these streams by sending us an email over at lumixlive@us.panasonic.com. Where I'm starting to get a little bit more active in trying to respond to the kind of simple emails that come through. It is still not a normal thing for us to be emailing back from that address, but I don't want you to think that we don't see any of those things. Those emails, we do see them, and they do help us kind of drive what kind of content we're going to be talking about over the next couple of weeks. So, with that, before we go any further, I want to remind everybody about the LUMIX Pro Services. This is the service program that we have for basically all of the Lumix G Series cameras that are out there. We have the free tier, which is the red membership. That just gets you the basic coverage for the extended 3-year warranty. It gets you the portal for actually submitting any kind of warranty repairs or any issues that you may have. So it's all separated out from the rest of the Panasonic Corporation for our normal electronics manufacturing repair services. Then we also have the Platinum series. The Platinum membership is the top tier version of the Lumix Pro Services. This is a much more involved kind of program. So this is if you're someone that's using your equipment on a day in, day out basis, if you're in the professional sense, or even if you just really, really enjoy having a solid support system behind your product, that's what the Platinum tier is. It is a paid tier service here in the United States. But that service gets you your 3-year warranty. It gets you an exclusive membership welcome kit with a really cool Peak Design strap. You get 2-day repairs with free next day shipping on both ways. You also get the access to our hotline. So that's a direct call-in line if you're running into some issues in the field and you need to actually speak to somebody about it. You get 20% off out of warranty repairs. So that's if you drop it or break it or something that's not covered under warranty. And then you also have the sensor cleanings and kind of general maintenance services that you can do throughout the year. So you get a couple times a year that you can send that kind of stuff in. So if you're someone who uses your equipment heavily and you want that peace of mind, definitely go take a look at it. Definitely at least go take a look at the Red membership. The Red one is free. If you're here in the United States, you can use lumix-pro.us. That will get you over onto the page for it. If you are not joining us from the United States, I will drop a link in the chat where you can take a look at the general LUMIX Pro Services, which will really just show you what's available in different regions and which countries have it available. So let me drop that in the chat right now. And there you go. Awesome. So now that that's out of the way, let's kind of get the only other thing that I really want to remind is that, so if you are new to these streams, these are weekly streams that we do every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. These are all always archived on our YouTube channel. So if you can't watch the whole thing here, or if Thursday at 2 p.m. might not work for you, they're all housed on the YouTube channel that you're on in a playlist called LUMIX Live. It lets you go back and take a look at every single thing that we've shot over the last year and a half. So we'll always have this content ready to go, and you can always take a look at it later. All right. Now, so let's kind of jump into it, and let's see what kind of questions we've got so far before we start going into actually looking at some of the cameras here. So looks like we got a question from Thor. It says, I have a question about video formats on the S5. Is the MOV same as MP4, or is there a difference? Also, which software do you recommend to edit S5 video on? Is Sony Vegas good? So there's a couple different things to know about MOV versus MP4. For the vast majority of people that are shooting, MOV is going to give you the better qualities that you can get out of the camera. So that's usually where, if you're in, say, like a GH camera, that's where your all-intra codecs are going to be. On the S5, the MOV format's going to get you more options for 4K. It's going to get you the higher bitrate options than MP4. The big difference is just really kind of what software and which operating system you're going to be working on. But in reality, Premiere, Final Cut, the vast majority of programs out there that you can use to edit the video in, you're going to be able to work with the MOV or MP4 files and not really have a problem with it. If you're looking for something where it natively shows in the operating system, that's where you will see a difference. And I always screw it up. I believe it's MOV is the one that you can view in Mac. MP4 really is only PC where it'll naturally show up. I could have that totally wrong, and I might have that backwards, so I apologize. Someone else can probably correct me if I'm wrong there. But in a lot of cases, there are usually plugins you can get that will let you view the extension. Or you can do like what a lot of people use is you download VLC Player. That lets you at least preview all of the video footage that you've got as long as the codec packages are updated. This way you'll be able to actually kind of cull through, see which footage you've got. When it comes to editing software, as Ulrich has pointed out, Sony Vegas, the software, I've never worked with it personally. I do know a number of people that do work with it and really do enjoy it. The truth is, it's really going to come down to partially what your operating system is. If you're on Mac, Final Cut's going to be a very well integrated program for it, because obviously it's an Apple product. If you're looking with, kind of being able to bounce back and forth between a Windows-based and a Mac-based computer, then things like DaVinci Resolve, Premiere, they're going to be a really good option for you, and all of them will work pretty much fine with it. I can see, so you're facing issues with MOV in Vegas. Yeah, so the big important thing with software in general, with MOV files and really MP4 files, is you want to make sure that if you're shooting in the 422 10-bit or 420 10-bit color spaces on the Lumix cameras, make sure the version of the program that you're using supports the 10-bit color space and the 10-bit files. DaVinci Resolve is a good example of this. There's the free version that you can download. That doesn't support the 10-bit files. it's MOV, 4K, 60p, like that part works. But when you go to 10-bit, it won't show you, so you have to buy the studio version. Programs like Premiere, you're paying a subscription fee for it, and yeah, it works with all of them. The other thing to look at is with the S5, because that's one of the more unique cameras in the market, you also have the ability to record ProRes RAW through the RAW over HDMI signal, or you can do Blackmagic RAW. And that will also determine which program you want to work in. Blackmagic RAW is going to perform the best in DaVinci Resolve. ProRes RAW technically is going to work the best in Final Cut, since it's an Apple product. But both can also be used in Premiere, so just complicate it even further. Usually you can download trials of all the different versions and play around and see which one works the best for you. Myself, I'm a Premiere editor because I'm 99% on my PC, and I don't really shoot RAW that often, video footage, really only when I'm testing it or addressing a question for somebody. So everything that comes out of the cameras works perfectly fine in Premiere Pro for me, and I use 2 different computers for that. So hopefully that addresses a bit of your question, Thor. Let's see, the other question here from Coles is, Lumix Cameras, on the live cropping feature, I wish there was a way to vary the time from 20 or 40 seconds. I use it a lot, but wish I could change the time to suit the shot. So, yeah, the live cropping feature, which, for those that don't know, what this does, this tool for creating video, is it allows you to do a 1080p output from the 4K signal that's coming from the camera, but you can actually do some basic post movements in the camera. You can program it up in certain cameras so that you can go from, say, the full sensor width that you're recording at, and then have it do a slow punch in, or you can have it do a pan as well while you're doing punch in, and it outputs that 1080p file. The difference there is just that when you do it on camera, it's limited to 20 or 40 seconds to map out the movement. Truthfully, the more accurate and probably easier way to do it may still be, in certain cases, if you need kind of granular control over how long that focus transition is, or that pull is going to be, is more likely going to be shoot it in 4K in the full width and then do your After Effects or whatever in post. This way you can control the speed, you can control, how long of a duration you want that pull to be. Yeah, it's kind of a little bit of a added benefit for those that don't want to have the work with it, and 20 to 40 seconds is a fairly common speed for it. But, like everything, it's not always going to address every single person's use case of it. Let's see here. Deep says, please suggest lightweight and easily handling mirrorless camera for daily vlogs. There's a couple different ones that we have that can work really well. It's just going to depend on what your general style of vlogging is. The G100, I know a lot of people are probably going to yell at me for this one, but the G100 actually I think is a great camera to get into it. It does have electronic stabilization. It's not a magnetic stabilization like some of the other cameras, but a number of the Lumix lenses are stabilized as well. That's a really nice entry if you're looking to get in with photo and video, and you're not really 100% focusing on one or the other. Otherwise, outside of that, you could always take a look at something like a G95, a G85, or even a G7. G7 is going to be a little bit bigger than the G100. They're both non-stabilized sensors, but they're both going to give you, 4K, 30p, or 1080, 60p, get you into that kind of recording, and then you're on the lens mount, so you know that you've got a huge selection of lenses available. If you don't want to go with an interchangeable lens camera, you could always take a look at something like an FZ series camera. They're going to be super zoom cameras. You're going to be using smaller sensors. So like an FZ1000 Mark II is going to be a 1-inch sensor. So it's going to be a balance between the larger 4/3 sensor and then the typical point and shoots, but still give you that front-facing screen, which is a fairly important thing for vlogging. You could also look at something like a ZS camera, a ZS80. which can flip that screen up and let you at least see yourself as well. A lot of the other cameras, they don't have flip screens on them, so it's a little tough to frame if you're not used to working that way. So hopefully that helps. Next question was from Steve. When is the 25 to 50 f1.7 going to be released? Weren't we expecting it earlier this week? I can double check. I believe they have started shipping. I will have to double check with some of our team. I know some of it can just depend on where you are in the country and shipping from Japan, from the facilities, things like that. The world in general is pretty messed up when it comes to shipping, so every once in a while, it may be missing by a week or so. But I know that for us, that lens has been very heavily pre-ordered. So if you didn't get an order in right now, call your retailer, get an idea from them as to where it is. But you should start seeing them pretty soon. Let's see here. What other questions we got here? Benjamin says, is there any loss of dynamic range when using 4K 60p? No, you're not going to have dynamic range loss compared to some others. Resolution and frame rate typically isn't what's going to cause dynamic range change in your image on its own. What will change that is the exposure values that you're using, which we're going to talk about some of the tools to help maximize dynamic range in a second. So if you're using 4K 60p and you've normally been shooting at 4K 24, you're going to notice that if you want to keep the exposure looking right, you're going to have to change parameters. Your shutter speed or shutter angle has to change. If you're on 180 degree or you're set up at a 1/120th of a second for shutter speed, you may have to adjust your aperture. Or if you're trying to stick to a certain aperture, you may have to go in and change your ISO. So when you start changing your ISO, that's where your dynamic range can change a little bit. So it's not exclusively down to just shooting in a mode. There's usually a couple of different things that that just change the overall kind of math for it. Next question here is, what is setting on S1 for dual native ISO? Is it low or high and auto? It's not documented on that. What is low and high mean? What ISO numbers for that? So with the S1, which actually I can jump over to this view now. So when you look at the, this is an S1H, but the S1 was updated and it has the same, pretty much the same ISO system in it now. You'll see that you have the option, if I go into the quick menu here, I have dual ISO high, dual ISO low, and then auto, dual ISO auto. What the difference is between these is that auto will let the camera basically say, I work like a normal ISO. I want to change my ISO values. I have the camera in log right now, so that's why it is set with 640 as the lowest before you go into the extended ISOs. So the auto mode lets you just cycle through your ISOs like a normal camera, and then it picks when it's going to change the circuitry over. So if I go back into this menu and I go change this to low and then come back out and go into change my ISOs, what you'll notice is that 640 is the lowest that this goes. Again, anything with a letter in front of it is an extended ISO, and I'll explain that in a little bit. So 640 is the lowest ISO here, which means in video shooting with log in this case, 640 is your native ISO in the low range dual native ISO circuitry. So that'll get you the best balance of noise versus dynamic range. So that's where the camera is rating, that's where we get our rating of 14 plus stops of dynamic range. Whenever you increase your ISO, you're going to be reducing dynamic range in some area. So it could be reducing it in the shadows, it could be clipping highlights. That's how ISO ranges typically work. When you're in the low range, you'll notice that the camera only goes up to 5000 ISO on this camera here, the S1H. But now if I go back in and I change this to high and then go in here, you'll see that I have a couple of low figures, but it starts at 4000 ISO and then goes all the way up to 51,200. Now, where this is important is that if you're shooting in ultra low light scenarios, so if you're setting up in a real low light shot and you don't want to be using added in lights, you're only using practical lighting or just available lighting, you can very easily just tell the camera go to high ISO range and select 4000, because you know that you're going to get the widest dynamic range and cleanest looking image at that 4000 if you're shooting in Vlog. And that's where you'd basically work, and then light accordingly. If you're going in a really bright day, then you'd want to set it to 640. So you could go onto the low circuit and set it 640. In a case like that, if you're shooting in really low light, that's where neutral density filter becomes your best friend. It's better to filter your lenses than to necessarily change around off of ISOs. So it's just really kind of where, what works best for the image. The alternative to this is using auto dual ISO. That literally all that's doing, like I said before, is that's just basically saying you're picking the ISO, you're going to change it whatever you want, and then the camera will automatically change over the circuitry to use the high gain or the low gain circuit, and it does it automatically in the background. Truthfully, the best practice is to get into cameras that have this enabled where you can set it yourself, work within the ranges. So if you know that you're going to be outdoors, bright day, set it at 640. If you know you're going to be in low light, darker situations, set it at the 4000, and then go up in ISO if you have to. One of the tricks that you can use if you're setting your exposures and you're coming in to where your ISO is saying to be at about like 3200, say, or 2000 ISO. Put the camera into the high ISO range and just go right to 4000 and then adjust your settings accordingly. And know that if you're actually shooting at a higher ISO, but you're going to have a cleaner looking image. It's a little counterintuitive to what you would normally think. But what that's basically doing is it's putting it into the proper circuitry and not basically taking 640 and then just boosting the gain up to get your higher ISO. The curve basically goes like this, hits 4000, drops back down, and then goes up again. So there's a bunch of tools out there that you can use to kind of help determine which, how to actually expose for these kinds of things. And we're going to talk about a couple of them in a little bit. Yes, I think I got that one there. Neil says, is there a possibility of seeing official ACES support on Micro Four Thirds cameras? Thanks for the streams. I don't know if there's anything with like official ACES support. I know that the S series does. There is the Vlog, because it's the same Vlog out of the Vericam. Works in the same workflow. Technically, the Micro Four Thirds cameras you can do the same thing with. The difference is just the sensor size and the way that the dynamic range works on those sensors. That's why it's Vlog L and not Vlog, because it's mapped to what that sensor is capable of. It's not always 100% into the same workflow, but it's they're designed to be fairly interchangeable if you're working on an all Vlog workflow. So let's see here. The other questions, okay, on the new Sigma 150, can I use 77 minutes or lower, full size? Renderman, the Sigma question you'd have to pose over to Sigma. I haven't used the 150-600, so I'm not really sure what the challenge would be there. I know that our 24 to 70 2.8. I can run a 77 millimeter filter on that with a step down ring from 82, because I use that lens a lot for my infrared photography, and I don't get vignetting with it. So there are some areas that you can get away with it, but I think if that lens has a 95 millimeter filter thread and you're going to 77, that's probably pretty aggressive. Even if you're not seeing the filter in the image, you're probably causing a lot of vignetting to happen compared to what that lens would do normally. But it's a good question I'd ask over to the people over at Sigma. It's here. Director Z, is there a way to completely turn off noise reduction? Not in camera. If you're on an S1H, like I've got here, so we're on my S1H. What you can do is if you go into the menu, go into the color profiles. So I've got Vlog here. And then you'll see on the S1H, we added a -1 for noise reduction. This reduces the noise reduction, but there still is going to be noise reduction applied to the image in camera. Really, the only way to get rid of, or to use no noise reduction and do it all yourself in post, would be to shoot either, realistically, to shoot ProRes RAW. So go out over HDMI RAW into a Ninja 5 or a Ninja 5 Plus, or Ninja V, whatever they're calling it now. Go into that recorder and shoot ProRes RAW. That basically will let you, that's a RAW image. There's no noise reduction. So it's going to be a noisier looking video file, but you're going to have more flexibility to actually adjust it yourself in post. If you use Blackmagic RAW, that is from my understanding, it's partially debayered, so it is very, very close to RAW, but it does have some noise reduction algorithms in it, so it's not going to be 100% no noise reduction. Yeah, there's a couple different ways to do it, but ultimately ProRes RAW, so using the camera's RAW over HDMI capability into a Ninja series, a Ninja V series or Ninja 5 series, that's going to let you get the closest to, well, actually pretty much no noise reduction in the video footage. Otherwise, internally, no, there's no way to turn it 100% off. Let's see here. What is the native ISO on the GH5? I actually don't know. I have asked this question before, but I don't remember if I ever got a direct, clear answer. I know the GH5S, I believe, is 405. Was it 400 or 405,000 or yeah. But yeah, we have some documentation. I'll take a look and see if I can find it for the GH5S. The GH5, yeah, I don't think we ever published what the native ISO is there. Let's see here. The next question is here. Is native ISO necessary? I don't always find native to be where I need my exposure. So it really depends on what you're shooting and how you're trying to shoot. If you're trying to maximize dynamic range, so say you're filming for an HDR output. So you want to be able to shoot something and have it display in full HDR, and you want to stick to the standard and make sure that it displays properly wherever it's being shown. Then, yeah, native ISO is going to be a fairly important thing to kind of keep to. And at that point, what it means is that if it's not really sitting where you need your exposure to be, like I said, if I'm outdoors on like a day like we've had the last couple of days here in Texas, it's been brutally sunny and hot. 640 ISO is going to be really, really overblown. Even with, stopping a lens down. You could stop down to f16 or f22 on some of these lenses and you're still, 2 stops overexposed. That's where getting back into the habit of using neutral density filters is the game changer for it. The closer you can stick to a native ISO, the more dynamic range that you retain for editing in post. So that's really, it is a very important thing, but if you're not shooting to maximize dynamic range, it's not the end of the world to be shooting off native ISO. Just know that if you go up in ISO, you're reducing dynamic range because you're introducing noise. And if you go below native ISO, so into the low range, so anything that shows up with an L, like this, wherever you see that L, if you do that to your ISOs, you're actually reducing your highlight dynamic range by doing that. So it just comes into picking what the best kind of balance is for the shoot that you're working with. Let's hear Ruckus. Welcome back. Best way to set custom white balance. Can we zoom into the image digitally with the S cameras when taking custom white balance? So we've talked about this before. The white balance on the Lumix cameras, you have a couple things that you can do. I'll put this camera back on. You have a couple things that you can do. You can either click the white balance button on the camera. You can dial in a custom Kelvin temperature if you know exactly what the lighting scenario is, and that's how it's going to work. Or you can do one of the 4 custom white balance selections. And to Rux's point, you can't digitally zoom in with these. So if I press up on the directional pad here, you'll see that I get a box in the middle. I can't zoom this in. The only thing I really could do is have a zoom lens attached, zoom in to the gray target that you see here, and then basically create the image. So what that means is I can take this, basically do this with it, get it in place, and I can't do this with the way my hands are set up. So if I basically do this, put it in place, and then push the menu set button as I put my hand in front of it, it's now taken the white balance of that scene. The alternative is, and I knew I kept this on my desk for a reason, the alternative that actually I think makes setting custom white balances infinitely easier than using something like this, where you can use it in a studio and you're perfectly fine, is using something like this. This is a very old, although you can still buy them online, you can still buy them in retailers. This is an Expo disc. So this one, it's an 18% gray. And the cool thing about this is that all you do with it is put it over the front of the lens. So if I go back here, you just take this, attach it to the front of the lens. This one's a 77mm filter. Go into my white balance, go back into that selection, and then press the button there. In this case, it's too dark because I have my exposure settings all screwed up. But that lets me set the white balance based on what's coming into the camera. Think of it when we used to use handheld meters, incident and reflective meters, same concept. This thing has been great for very, very quickly setting custom white balances, especially if you're in the middle of, say, like a wedding day and you're jumping from room to room. It's literally, you just hold this thing up in front of the lens, get it in the direction that you're going to be taking the picture, go to that custom white balance, click the button, and then you're good to go. We are no way sponsored or work at all with Expo Disc, but this has been one of the things that I've used for like the last 11 years of shooting, just because of how easy and straightforward this was from the photography side primarily. Now with video, it's gotten a lot easier since you can do the same white balance correction on the Lumix cameras while you're in video. This thing becomes a really cool tool. So this is, it's an Expo disc, and they make one, I think it's like version 2 is the one that they're on now, which is what I think this one is. And yeah, it's a really cool, nifty little thing. And it acts as a lens cap if you happen to lose a lens cap while you're out there. So hopefully that helps, that answer, Ruckus. Let's see here. You want to get premium service, the red for G9s, but Puerto Rico's not on the list of countries. What can I do? Honestly, I'm not sure, Ark. I know you can reach out to the LPS team on the LUMIX Pro Service website. But honestly, I don't work close enough with the team about the way the regions are set up, as to what's involved with it. But yeah, unfortunately, I believe Puerto Rico is not on the list for the LPS program. So you can definitely contact in with LUMIX Pro Service and let them know that, that's where you are and where you'd really like to actually take part of the service. What is the native ISOs in the GH5, or what ISO will give you more dynamic range? So we covered that before. I think if you put the camera into the Vlog-L profile and then bring your ISO down to the lowest number, I think that's going to give you the best dynamic range. as long as you're not going into the low range like we were talking about before. That's probably going to get you the best of the dynamic range on that sensor. Let's see here. Ruckus, another question. When in video mode on the S-Series cameras, how come the autofocus keeps active when in single focus mode using one area? The focus box continuously hunts for focus on single focus mode. So there's two things when you're using focus in the video modes. Let me back out of this. So one of the first things is, so this camera is in manual focus. So if I change this to single focus, you see I have my focus box. But if I go into the menu and then I go to the focus tab, let me make sure I move this. You'll see here on the S-Series cameras and all the newer cameras, we have a couple of different options here. There's continuous AF modes. So if I go into continuous AF mode 2, means that it's going to work all the time. If I go to mode 1, it's only going to work when recording video. This is what's allowing the camera basically to say you want it to continuously focus and you want it to basically be in standby. So if you're jumping back and forth between using the camera out over HDMI, that's where you're going to want this to be on mode 2. The other thing that you can take a look at is, and actually I don't know if we still have it in the camera menus anymore, because it's not something that I commonly had to look for. When you go in, something you want to take a look at and see if it's on in your camera is Quick AF. Quick AF is basically if you've got the camera, which if I click the display button, I think it'll do it, right? Yeah, continuously advances focusing enabled for quick shooting, which in basic terms what that means is if you have Quick AF on and then you go and look through the viewfinder, it's going to try to autofocus. So if you're shooting and the viewfinder keeps going on and off, that can make it look like it's working as if you're getting that issue. When you go and make sure, so one thing is to make sure that this is off. Eye sensor AF is something to make sure that you have off as well. That's the other thing that when the viewfinder's being running, that will trip the AF system. And then, yeah, there's a couple other modes here, but ultimately for that, the biggest thing is going to be just if you're in single or continuous, you just look at the top on the display there. You'll see in the top right, it says AFS, and I go to AFC, and then I go to manual focus. And just a little tip for everybody, the little P that you see next to the AFS, and then next to the M, that means focus peaking. That's just telling you that focus peaking is enabled. So ultimately, it's just a matter of checking which mode you're in. If the lens is saying that it's still autofocus, that's why it might be trying to do that, because it's going to override what you've set in the camera. But yeah. So let's see here. Martin says, will Lumix release a Super 35 16:9 sensor in Micro Four Thirds? There wouldn't be a point. Super 35 or APS-C sensors too big to actually utilize completely. Yes, I know there was that one camera, but it's not there anymore. Causes, I think, a little too many issues. 4/3 sensors are Micro Four Thirds is the mount, 4/3 is the sensor that's designed for the mount. And then the multi-aspect 4/3 sensor is the largest to take advantage of the optics that are designed for Micro Four Thirds. Let's see here. All right, so a couple more answers about that stuff. Does the S1 have full sensor readout without paid firmware update, or is it not? So the S1, the S series cameras, S1, S5, and the S1H have a full sensor width readout up to 4K 30p. 4K 60p is a Super 35 region of the sensor. The S1R can do a 1.01 crop in 4K 60p, but it's a very different architecture sensor that's also not optimized for video like we talked about last week. So yes, it can get a wider field of view, but it doesn't have the same general capabilities as the rest of the S series cameras. So yeah, it'll have full sensor width up to 30p, regardless of whether or not you're using the paid update or not, or the SFU2. The SFU2 is what will give you RAW over HDMI, which will also get you the 5.9K, which will be full sensor width, just not downsampled to 4K. And even then, the 4K is a windowed 4K because it's RAW. It's actually doing pixel to pixel. It's not trying to do binning or anything to create a full sensor width because that's not RAW. Let's see here. One of the questions. Sorry if someone has asked this question, but is the Luminance spot meter something that has possibility of being added to the S1 because it's in the S5? I don't know if it's something that's going to come to the S1. I know that, yeah, like you said, it is in the S5. It's in the S1H. That is one of the things that we do bring up, and we will always point out to our team in Japan that's being asked. That people want to see Luminance spot meter. But yeah, it's a pretty interesting system that we could take a look at. Photography, cinematography, and their cameras. Cool about the phone. It's kind of an out of place point for the cameras here. Let's see here. Does the FZ 2000 2500 can record video and SD card and send video over the HDMI to an external monitor? The FZ 2500 100% can, and I think the FZ 1000 Mark II can as well. It's been a while since I looked at the FZ 1000, the original one. It's possible that the original FZ 1000 might not do it, just because of the era that camera came from. But I'm pretty sure the Mark II can do it, and I'm pretty sure the 2500 can do it. I'd have to double check and take a look there. Let's see here. I've searched for this info on the internet about Luminance Levels. I use the GH5. There's little to no information about using the different levels, which are different when using 1080 or 4K. So when we talk about some of the different tools and stuff that you have in the cameras to kind of help with your exposures and setups, Luminance Levels is one of those things to look at. So you'll see that I have my camera right now in MOV. It's in 4K 60p, and it's shooting 420 10-bit in long GOP. So if I go into the camera here, and I go up into my settings, and I remember where my luminance levels are. It's been a while since I've changed any of that stuff. You'll see to start with, actually, yeah, why am I... Oh, it's because I'm in Vlog. So, if I come in here and change my color profile out of Vlog, let's change this to natural. One of the more common ones. So if I go in here and then go into my menu settings here, you'll see that I have 3 different luminance level options. I have 0 to 10, do it this way. So I have 0 to 1023, I have 64 to 940, and 64 to 1023. These 3 values are basically just going to depend on where you're outputting your footage or what you're editing in it. 0 to 1023 is the full luminance range, so that's 0 being black, no information, 1023 being the your highest, brightest shade, or the luminance value. 64 to 940 is it's clipping out the highlight, and it's clipping out the shadow. So it's basically giving you the basic setup so that you know that you're not going to blow your highlights, and you know that you're not going to blow your shadows. 64 to 1023 is the one that I'm honestly not 100% sure about. What I do know is that, so for like these kinds of broadcasts that we're doing here, I typically always have my camera on 64 to 940 because when I send this up to YouTube, I know that if it looks right while I'm editing it and while I'm looking at it on the camera, when it hits YouTube, it's not all of a sudden where all the shadows are darkened out and all the highlights are blown, that you can get by shooting in 0 to 1023. Now the big difference is that, like you said, between 4K and 1080, the real difference that you're going to see is if I come up here and I change this to an 8-bit color space, Now you'll see that those luminance levels changed to 0 to 255, 16 to 235, and 16 to 255. Same thing, just smaller range. 8-bit has less luminance values than 10-bit does. Same goes for 12-bit and 16-bit as you start looking at the different bit depths across all these different cameras. The reason 12-bit is kind of important is that raw video data over HDMI is going out as 12-bit, so you get even more luminance values than you do in the 10-bit internal for the cameras. So you get more information that you can work with. So hopefully that helped clear some of that up. Ultimately, just look at where you're outputting. 0 to 255 or 0 to 1023 is going to be the largest, but you may run into issues where you take a look at the footage comes in and all your shadows are completely dumped into the ground and all your highlights are blown clear out. It depends on where your output's going to be. Let's see here. Where was I? Okay, here we are. I was thinking about a GH5 Mark II, but I already have a lot of Olympus lenses. Are there any real incompatibility issues to think about other than DFD? Really, the only things that you run into as far as like a quote-unquote incompatibility would be certain things like lens function buttons. Sometimes those work, sometimes they don't. It just depends on if it's using the right information. So usually you count on the lens function buttons usually don't work, and if the Olympus lens is one of the optically stabilized lenses, it won't work with our dual IS system, and vice versa. Our dual IS system won't work with their, I think they call it Sync IS. That's really the only major thing that you can think of. Otherwise, the lens mount and the lenses themselves and the files carry over the correction data from the lenses. So when you put it into something like Lightroom, if you're using it for photography, it'll know how to correct the lens properly on that sensor and on that camera. So you really shouldn't have much of an issue with it with that. So Lumix is ever going to release a cell phone for filmmakers? That's where you're going with that, the cell phone question. We used to make a cell phone. It was called the CM1. Yeah, probably not making a cell phone for the industry. You have to go up against companies like Samsung and Apple that own a big portion of that market. We've got the cameras, and we think the cameras are infinitely better than whatever a cell phone is going to give you. And I fully stand behind that, even personally. So, let's hear. Not a question, though. I want to say thank you for the live streams. Of course. That's exactly why we're here. You guys drive the questions, and I hopefully answer as many of them as I can for y'all. Jake says, any plan to remove the 10-bit recording limits on the S5? It's a deal breaker for me and the only thing keeping me from getting one. So, no. The S5 has time limits not necessarily because of 10-bit, but thermals. The S5 is a much smaller chassis than an S1 and even an S1H. So to do unlimited recording on the cameras, you really do need to go up to an S1H if you want reliable unlimited recording. The S1 can get longer record times because it's a larger body. It can properly dissipate the thermals. So you really just kind of, it's physics, really. You're either going to be actively cooling a camera to be able to get unlimited recording, or you're going to try to passively cool it, which anyone that's done any kind of work on building a computer, you look at a CPU cooler for a desktop, all the passive coolers that exist that have come out like within the last year, they're gigantic and they're really not that efficient. By comparison to something like liquid cooling or a tower air cooler, it's the same thing. Smaller chassis, you're probably not going to see the record limits removed on a camera like that because then the camera would overheat. And ultimately, reliability is a very important thing. It's great if you go out there and you shoot and, the camera says that, maybe you can get 40 minutes out of recording, but if it shuts off after 10 minutes because it thermal throttles itself into oblivion, and then you're sitting waiting for 20 minutes for the camera to cool down so you can get another 5 minutes of shooting, that's no way to work as a professional tool. Our cameras, when we tell you, like when there's a limit imposed on some of the recording methods, it's so that you can actually trust that the camera is going to hit that mark every time you go to shoot with it. And the important thing with the S5 is that even though, say you're on like a 30-minute limit or 15-minute limit or 20-minute limit, whatever a limit states in the vast majority of our cameras, you can immediately just click the button again and start recording. You don't have to worry about cooldown times on our cameras. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It just will work. Unless you are in a very kind of outlier situation, which would be middle of, say, like the Texas summer, in the desert, direct sun, not shading the camera at all, where you are massively going over the 104 degrees Fahrenheit that we rate the pro cameras to. If you're going over that, yeah, you'll see a thermal warning on it, and you may get a warning on the camera that says, hey, we got to like cool this down. It's still too hot. Those are outlier scenarios. That is pushing it well past what really any camera ever should be used in. But yeah, our cameras, when we say it's unlimited recording, it's unlimited because we know that it can actually do it. If there is a limit, it's because it's protecting the internals of the camera so that they don't get over too hot. And so you're not stuck with a 15-minute downtime waiting for your camera to cool just so you can shoot again. Let's see here. Martin says, what's the best setup for night video shoots with little to no additional light? Fast lenses. So you're going to want fast, bright lenses. So like 1.8. 1.2 is probably way too shallow for even just normal shooting. And then ultimately, that's where if you've got one of the Lumix cameras, one of the S-series cameras, and you shoot at the higher native ISO, so say like 4000 on the S-series cameras, that's going to help you greatly into that range. Now, there are limits to those. 4000 ISO to get you the most dynamic range and the cleanest looking image, that gives you a lot of room in post to work with, especially if you shoot it in RAW. But then outside of that, it's going to be, play with some of your exposures. Go up in ISO, do some tests, see what level of noise is good for the project you're working on. Ultimately, in ultra low light shooting, I would advise not shooting in log, shoot in a 709 color profile. Something like natural or, Cine D, one of those profiles. Vlog, if you underexpose a logarithmic profile, you're going to run into adding a lot of noise into that footage when you start trying to bring those shadows up. A 709 profile, yeah, you're not going to have as much dynamic range, but you'll have a cleaner looking image because you're not really going to be, digging detail out of the shadows as far. You just want to take a look at how how the scene is trying to look. Natural lighting's great. It just depends on how dark of a natural light you're kind of set to look at. Let's see here. So 4K 60p crop limit to hardware, or can it be full sensor with a firmware update? It is a hardware. It's at 4K 60p from a Super 35 region. So it's not a firmware thing that's going to be coming out. Let's see here. RJ says, with my S5, I can shoot over an hour and just make 2 or 3 clips that can get edited together without loss of footage and is never overheated. Yeah, so yes, you can record much longer that way. The whole point with, like I said, with the record limitations there is that moment of the processor and the sensor not having to consistently keep processing all the footage is what allows it to keep the camera in check thermal-wise. There are thresholds that are built in all the cameras. It's the same reason why the G9 doesn't have unlimited recording when it's a very similar sensor to what's in a GH5 or a GH5S or a GH5 Mark II. So that's where you have some differences there. Thermal design internally is really what drives whether or not a camera can do unlimited recording, to where you can just set it and forget it kind of thing. Cool. Looks like we're pretty good on some of the questions so far. So one of the things that I wanted to point out, because a couple people were asking about the Luminance spot meter. Now, this is one of the features in the cameras that I don't think many people have really had experience with, or may not 100% know how this system works. So, with the Luminance spot meter in the Lumix cameras, let me change this back over to how I had it set before. So you see we are in the low range ISO. I'm going to drop this down to 640 ISO. And then I'm going to brighten, sorry for that, I'm going to brighten my LED light over here a little bit to get this back. Yeah, we're about close. So what Luminance spot meter is this box that you see here, and I'm just going to move the manual focus box. So you see this box right here. There it is, I can coordinate. So what this box is telling you is it's basically you're putting that over where the 18% gray card is for your scene. So you'll see right now I'm at 640 ISO. I'm right now the 18% gray is registering at plus 0.5 stops. Now I can shift this a bit where, like, if I go in and I adjust, yeah, so at f2.5 right now my 18% gray is showing that it is at 0 stops. What this means is that while I'm shooting at a native ISO, so I'm at 640 ISO, I can take this point, bring it into, say, a really, really dark shadow. So if I turn this, sorry, as I talk away from the microphone. So if I turn this a little bit, I go back in here, if I bring this, not that one, if I bring this, put it in there, you'll see that the shadowed region here, which is not getting direct light from the LED I have off to the side, that spot right there is going to be almost 5 stops under my middle 18% gray, or what would be 42 IRE on the exposure scale. What it also means is that I can then take this point and go over to the wall over here and see that that wall's only 0.3 stops over my middle gray. If I go in and I put something that's like ultra white over here, I can then, again, bring that point over there. Again, that's only, 0.3 stops over. But what I can do now is I can also go in and start adjusting my exposure, which I wouldn't do it this way. I'm going to do it this way. And we'll go up to 4000 ISO. Now, my midtones are, not that one. My midtone is 2.6 stops over. That similar gray piece is about 2.8. My shadow region is now only 1.9, 1.8 stops underexposed. I know that I've got more flexibility in here to work with this image. So you use this to spot check a scene that you're shooting to know, well, how bright is that highlight? How dark is that shadow? How many stops past 42 IRE or middle gray is that image going to be? So the reason this tool is important is if you're doing anything where you're working with HDR content, you want to try to get as much highlight information and you want to be able to expose enough so that your shadows are in the right region. But you don't want to be doing the exposed to the right method. This is the more accurate way to actually shoot with the camera. ETTR is a good way to save your shadows because you're pushing all of your exposure value up towards your highlight range just before they clip. But what you'll know when you expose and you set up an image this way, when you have the ability to, is that your midtones are going to be in the right range, which means you're not going to get plasticky skin, you're not going to have the issues that kind of come by overexposing and then pulling down those highlights, where you get some information, but the distribution of that data is a little different. So you know that you're able to get your skin tones to look proper. You know that your highlight recovery on Vlog is around 6 stops for your highlight recovery. So if you're looking at a scene and the bright sky on the image may look blown out, but on the spot meter, it's only saying that it's 5 stops over you know that you've still got data there. And then in the shadows, Vlog is rated for around 8 stops underexposed, but realistically, you really want to try to keep yourself around like 5 under to really, like, if you know that you have to dig out of the shadows, you can do it. But usually at that point, a lot of that shadow information is going to be, you know, kept a number of stops below your midtones, because you're not really always going to try to get the full crazy looking blanket exposure across everything. You'll be able to tell and go through here and say, well, I've got more than enough room in my shadows. I can actually bring my shadow region down a little bit with lighting and control it that way. So this is one of the better tools that you can use to actually be able to determine, you know, what the best way to expose a scene is going to be. And in conjunction with this, you also have on these cameras, you also have a waveform on the S1H. You do have the ability to resize it as well. So you're able to say, all right, I want to use my waveform to judge my exposure. When you look at the different lines that you have through here, the solid line on the bottom is 0. The midline that's lit up here, right there, I can hold still. That solid line in the middle is 42 IRE, and then I believe the top line is 100. So as long as you're keeping in those ranges, that's where you know that you're going to be able to actually have the maximum amount of information that you can be recording. Now, the waveform monitor does not output over HDMI, so that's something where you'd use the waveform monitor on like the Ninja 5, or I have a Video Assist 5G up there, or 12G up there. That's where you'd use the waveform monitor on some of those devices, where you can also be using, you know, an RGB parade to see about color mixing as well. So, that's kind of like the ultimate wrap up of what we wanted to really talk about. There are other tools here, and I'm happy to go into any other tools if anybody wants for a couple more minutes. But I see some of the other questions. Martin says, have you tested one of the Midicon Speedmaster Cine lenses? I have not. It would be interesting to definitely test. T1.0 is a pretty fast lens then, if it's actually rating T1.0 on that scale. But let's see. Yeah, otherwise it looks like we got through all the questions, and we're at 2 o'clock. So I want to thank everybody for joining today. You guys had some really cool questions. Hopefully the stream was beneficial and you got some information out of this. If you didn't already, take a look at the poll that we dropped in the chat there. It's always cool to see what the kind of mix of people are that are shooting with the cameras. If you're photo, video, and just kind of what that looks like. As of right now, it looks like a vast majority, well, 44% of you, I'll be direct with it, 44% of you are photo and video hybrid users, which is actually really cool to see. So some of the stuff that we talked about, for a big portion of it, you know, kind of falls pretty similar to the photo side as far as, you know, what things you want to look out for as far as ISOs, the dynamic range that you can get out of an image. A lot of it's going to be the same in a still side versus in the video side. There's not really a big difference there. The biggest point is just that a raw still image is going to have infinitely more dynamic range and flexibility than even log footage on a video file. And technically, even a lot of like the 12-bit video files that you have coming from, say, like RAW over HDMI, those are 12-bit. When you go to the raw stills from the S1, S1R, S1H, S5, those are 14-bit RW2 RAW files. They still have more room to work with. So as a parting last kind of comment to everybody, if you are someone in that group that's the photo and video hybrid shooters, I'll give you one last little tip that a lot of people don't know about. If you're jumping back and forth between shooting photo and video, you've probably gotten frustrated with looking at the color profiles that you had set up. If you're shooting log for video and then you want to go into stills and the camera decides to all of a sudden go into log as well when you jump into stills. There's an easy way to fix this. You go into the camera menu, you go into the wrench, and then you're going to go down to the... Here you're going to go to, if I remember exactly which page it is. And of course I'm going to like choke on getting right to the page because I completely forget it. Nope, there it is. You would go to Creative Video Combined Set. Go into this menu and make sure that all of these icons are the camcorder icon. What this means for AF mode, metering mode, photo style, white balance, and then the exposure compensation is that if I'm jumping back and forth between photo and video and I want to use standard color profile for stills and vlog for video, when I change them, it keeps all of those things separated. So your video profiles and the setup that you have for video stays for video, and your photo stuff stays for photos. So as I'm changing the top dial from creative video mode to manual stills, all of those things will change accordingly, and you don't have to worry about things jumping back and forth, staying the same between the two cameras there, or between the two modes there. Yeah. So that's the last tip for the day. Let's see here. Yeah, it looks good on the questions. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us. The questions that y'all had were awesome. Thank you for taking time to answer some of the poll questions there, which I just closed. As a reminder, the LUMIX Pro Service Red and Platinum tier are available here in the United States. If you are joining us from outside of the United States, you can take a look at what is available on the LUMIX Pro Services at the link I just dropped into the chat. If you're in the US, use the QR code. It'll bring you over to the page, and you can take a look and actually see if it's something you want to get involved with and get in. With that, thank you. We will be back next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So definitely subscribe to the channel. Hit like on this video if you enjoyed the content or found something useful for you. It helps me out tremendously in being able to continue bringing these videos to everybody as we grow this channel. If you know someone in the community that you think could benefit from these but might not know that we're doing them, definitely share the video. Let them know that we do these on a weekly basis. And with that, thank you. Hope you have a great rest of your week. And I'll see everybody next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Take care, everybody.